The scream echoed through the marble hallways of the Montgomery mansion at exactly 6:47 a.m. Sarah Montgomery stood frozen in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom, her hand clutched to her chest. There, in the middle of the pink carpeted floor, stood 12-year-old Emma, the girl doctors swore would never walk again. Emma's legs trembled like leaves in a storm, her hands gripping the bedpost so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks, but she was standing. And beside her, hands hovering protectively near Emma's waist, was Grace Williams, the family's newest maid, a woman they'd hired just 3 months ago. "Mrs. Montgomery," Grace said softly, her dark eyes meeting Sarah's shocked stare. "I know this looks crazy, but please, don't panic." Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her daughter, her precious daughter who hadn't stood on her own in 18 months, was defying every medical expert in the country. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. Welcome to stories where wealth meets humanity and every moment reveals the unexpected. Subscribe now for more powerful billionaire stories that will move and inspire you. 20 months earlier, Emma Montgomery had everything a girl could want. Her father, Robert Montgomery, owned half the tech companies in Silicon Valley. Their house had 14 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and a movie theater. Emma attended the most expensive private school, where she was captain of the soccer team and president of the student council. Can you imagine having everything, and then losing it all in a single moment? It happened on a Tuesday. Emma was riding her favorite horse, Thunderbolt, through the trails behind their estate. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. She felt free, powerful, alive. Then a snake slithered across the path. Thunderbolt reared up, his front hooves pawing the air. Emma, who had been riding since she was 5, held on tight. But the horse twisted sideways, and suddenly Emma was flying through the air. She had time for one thought before she hit the ground. This is going to hurt. She heard the crack before she felt the pain. The doctors used big words Sarah and Robert didn't want to understand. Spinal cord injury, permanent paralysis, wheelchair dependent. They said Emma's soccer days were over. Her dancing days were over. Her walking days were over. "Wait, I need to tell you something crucial," the lead doctor had said, pulling Sarah and Robert aside. "Your daughter will need round-the-clock care. Everything in her life is about to change." He was right. Emma spent 6 months going to therapy 3 times a week. She worked until she cried, trying to make her legs move even an inch. Nothing worked. Her legs just lay there, useless and still, like they belonged to someone else. The worst part wasn't the wheelchair. It was watching Emma's smile disappear. The girl who once lit up every room now barely spoke. She quit school and stayed in her bedroom with the curtains drawn. Her friends stopped visiting because she wouldn't see them. Her parents hired the best doctors, the most expensive therapists, bought the fanciest medical equipment. Nothing helped. "She's given up," Robert told Sarah one night, his voice breaking. "Our daughter has given up on life." That's when they decided they needed more help at home. Not just any help. Someone who could be there for Emma every day. Someone patient and kind. They interviewed 47 people before they met Grace Williams. Grace was 38 years old, with gentle eyes and steady hands. She had worked as a nurse's aide before becoming a house cleaner to make more money for her own 2 kids. During her interview, she didn't talk about her experience or her skills. Instead, she asked about Emma. What does she like? Grace wanted to know. What made her happy before? Sarah almost cried. Nobody had asked about Emma the person, only Emma the patient. She loved horses, Sarah whispered, and soccer, and singing. She used to sing all the time. Grace nodded slowly. Then that's where we start. Little did they know, this decision would change everything. Grace started working at the Montgomery mansion on a Monday morning. The other staff warned her about Emma. She doesn't talk much, the cook said. She throws things sometimes when she's angry, the gardener added. Don't take it personally, the butler advised. She's been through a lot. Grace just smiled and headed upstairs with a breakfast tray. She knocked on Emma's door. No answer. She knocked again. Go away. Emma's voice was sharp and cold. Can't do that, sweetie, Grace called back. I brought you pancakes. Your mom said they're your favorite. I said go away. Grace opened the door anyway. Emma's room was dark except for a small lamp by the bed. The curtains were drawn tight. Clothes lay scattered on the floor. Emma sat in her wheelchair near the window, her back to the door. I'm Grace, she said, setting down the tray. And I'm not going anywhere, so you might as well look at me. Slowly, Emma turned her wheelchair around. Her eyes were red and puffy. Her long blonde hair hung in tangles around her face. I don't need another babysitter, Emma said. Good, Grace replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. Because I'm not a babysitter. I'm someone who's going to help you remember who you are. Emma laughed, but it was bitter. I know who I am. I'm the girl who can't walk. No, Grace said firmly. You're Emma Montgomery. You're 12 years old. You love horses and soccer and singing. And just because your legs don't work right now doesn't change any of that. Right now. Emma's voice rose. Don't you get it? They'll never work. The doctors said. Doctors don't know everything, Grace interrupted. What happened next still gives me chills. Grace stood up and walked to Emma's closet. She pulled out a soccer ball that was buried under a pile of old clothes. Tomorrow, Grace said, we're going outside. I can't. You can sit in your wheelchair in the sunshine and tell me about soccer. That's all. Can you do that? Emma stared at her for a long moment. Finally, she whispered, maybe. It was the first time in months Emma had said yes to anything. But neither of them knew that this simple moment, this tiny agreement, would lead to the impossible morning 3 months later, when Emma would stand on her own 2 feet. And they definitely didn't know about the secret Grace had been keeping. A secret that would explain everything. Grace kept her promise. The next morning, she wheeled Emma out to the garden. The sunshine felt strange on Emma's skin, warm and bright after so many months in the dark. She squinted like a person waking from a long sleep. Tell me about soccer, Grace said, sitting on the grass beside the wheelchair. Emma shrugged. What's there to tell? I can't play anymore. But you remember playing, don't you? Grace picked up the soccer ball and turned it in her hands. Close your eyes. Tell me what it felt like. This is stupid, Emma muttered. Humor me. Emma sighed and closed her eyes. It felt free, like flying. When I ran down the field with the ball, nothing else mattered. Not school, not my parents' expectations, nothing. Just me and the game. And your body knew exactly what to do, didn't it? Grace's voice was soft. Your legs just moved without you thinking about it. Emma's eyes snapped open. Why are you doing this? Why are you making me remember things I can't have anymore? Grace looked at her steadily. Because your body remembers too. And memories are powerful things. Actually, let me pause here because this detail is important. Grace had learned something during her years working in hospitals. Something the doctors didn't talk about much. She'd seen patients who were told they'd never recover suddenly get better. Not because of medicine or surgery, but because they believed they could. The brain was powerful. Hope was powerful. But Grace had something else too. Something she'd learned from her grandmother back in Jamaica. That afternoon, while Emma napped, Grace went to her small room in the staff quarters. From her suitcase, she pulled out a worn notebook filled with her grandmother's handwriting. The pages smelled like herbs and old paper. Her grandmother, Mama Rose, had been a healer. Not a doctor. A real healer who used plants and massage and ancient techniques passed down through generations. Grace had watched her help people the hospitals had given up on. The body wants to heal, Mama Rose used to say. Sometimes it just needs reminding. Grace flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Exercises for awakening sleeping muscles, massage techniques for damaged nerves, herbal remedies for inflammation. Can you imagine keeping a secret this big? Knowing you might be able to help, but afraid everyone would think you were crazy? Grace knew what would happen if she told the Montgomerys about her plan. They'd fire her. They'd call her a fraud. Rich people didn't believe in grandmother's remedies. They believed in expensive doctors and fancy machines. But Emma was running out of hope. And hope, Grace knew, was the most important medicine of all. 3 days later, "My legs hurt," Emma said suddenly. She was in the library trying to read. Grace looked up from dusting the shelves. "Hurt how?" "Like tingling. Pins and needles." Emma's forehead wrinkled. "Is that normal?" Grace's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice calm. "Could be. Your body might be waking up a little." "Does it hurt a lot?" "No, it's just weird." Emma rubbed her thighs, frustrated. "I hate this. I hate feeling things but not being able to move. What if I could help with that?" Grace asked carefully. Emma looked suspicious. "How?" "My grandmother taught me massage techniques. Special ones, for people with injuries like yours. It might help with the tingling. Might even help the muscles remember what they're supposed to do." "The doctors said nothing would help." "The doctors said nothing they tried would help," Grace corrected. "That's different. Will you let me try?" Emma hesitated. Then she nodded. "Whatever. Can't make things worse, right?" Little did she know, this decision would change everything. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful billionaire story. That evening, after the Montgomerys had gone to a charity dinner, Grace brought Emma to her bedroom. She'd set up a massage table, which she'd bought with her own money and hidden in her room. The air smelled like lavender and eucalyptus from the oils she'd prepared. "Okay, this is weird," Emma said as Grace helped her onto the table. "Weird can be good," Grace replied. She started with gentle touches, warming the oils between her palms. Then she began working on Emma's legs, using the techniques Mama Rose had taught her. She pressed specific points, moved in specific patterns, all while talking to Emma about soccer and horses and singing. "Your muscles are listening," Grace said softly. "Even if you can't feel it yet, they're remembering." First, nothing happened. Days turned into weeks. Every evening, while Emma's parents were busy, Grace worked on Emma's legs. She made special teas from herbs she bought at the international market. She guided Emma through visualization exercises. "Imagine your legs moving," Grace would say. "See it in your mind. Feel it." The other staff started to notice changes in Emma. She smiled more. She came out of her room. She started reading again, even laughing sometimes. But she still couldn't walk. Week 7. "Grace." Emma's voice was shaky. It was 2 in the morning. Grace rushed to Emma's room, her heart pounding. "What's wrong?" Emma was sitting up in bed, her face pale in the moonlight. "My toe. My right toe. I think I just moved it." Grace turned on the light. "Do it again." They both stared at Emma's right foot. For a long moment, nothing happened. Emma's face scrunched up with concentration. Then, barely, just barely, her big toe twitched. Emma gasped. Grace grabbed the bedpost to keep from falling. "Oh my God!" Emma whispered. "Oh my God! Did you see that?" "I saw it," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. "I saw it, baby. You did it." Emma tried again. This time, 3 toes moved. Just a tiny bit, but they moved. They held each other and cried. "Don't tell anyone yet," Grace warned. "This is just the beginning. We have a lot more work to do." What happened next still gives me chills. For the next 6 weeks, Emma's progress exploded. First the toes, then the ankles, then the knees. Grace increased the intensity of their sessions. Emma worked harder than she'd ever worked at anything. They practiced in secret late at night when everyone was asleep. Grace would help Emma stand, holding her weight while Emma's legs shook with effort. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds. "You're doing it," Grace would whisper. "You're really doing it." 3 months after Grace arrived, Emma woke up before dawn. Her legs felt different, stronger, more alive. Without thinking, she swung them over the side of the bed. Her feet touched the floor. She put weight on them. They held. Heart racing, Emma grabbed the bedpost and pulled herself up. Her legs trembled like crazy, but they didn't collapse. She was standing, actually standing. That's when she screamed. Not from pain or fear, but from pure shock and joy. That's when her mother ran in. That's when everything changed. But they had no idea that this miraculous moment would bring both celebration and danger. Because in exactly 3 hours, their lives would be turned upside down in a way none of them could have predicted. The hospital room was cold and white and smelled like cleaning chemicals. Emma sat on the examination table, her legs dangling over the edge, legs that were swinging back and forth like any normal 12-year-old's legs. Beside her stood Sarah and Robert, their faces a mixture of joy and confusion. Across from them, Dr. Peterson, the neurologist who had declared Emma permanently paralyzed, stared at his clipboard like it had personally betrayed him. "This is impossible," he muttered for the 5th time. "But it happened," Robert said firmly. "Our daughter is walking." Dr. Peterson looked up, his eyes sharp behind his glasses. "Mr. Montgomery, I need you to understand something. The kind of spinal injury Emma had doesn't just heal. Not like this. Not this fast." He turned to Emma. "Have you been receiving treatment we don't know about?" Emma's eyes darted to the doorway, where Grace stood waiting in the hallway. They'd agreed not to mention her yet. Not until they knew how people would react. "I've been doing exercises," Emma said carefully. "Working really hard." "What kind of exercises?" The doctor's pen was poised over his notepad. "Wait, I need to tell you something crucial." Grace had warned Emma this would happen. Doctors didn't like mysteries. They didn't like things that didn't fit their textbooks. And they especially didn't like being wrong. "Can we just be happy she's better?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "Does it matter how?" "Yes, Mrs. Montgomery, it matters very much." Dr. Peterson set down his clipboard. "If your daughter has found some kind of treatment that works, other paralyzed patients need to know about it. This could change lives. Or ruin them," Grace thought from the hallway. 2 hours later, the Montgomerys sat in their living room. Emma was curled up on the couch, finally home from the hospital. Grace brought in tea, her hands steady even though her heart was racing. "Grace," Robert said slowly, "please sit down. We need to talk." Grace sat on the edge of a chair, her back straight. "The doctors are baffled," Sarah said. "They've run every test. Emma's spine has healed in a way they say is medically impossible." She paused. "You've been with Emma every day for 3 months. You must know something. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? Knowing you had to tell the truth, but afraid of what would happen next." Grace took a deep breath. "I've been helping her. With massage and exercises and herbs. Techniques my grandmother taught me." Robert's eyebrows shot up. "Your grandmother?" "She was a healer back in Jamaica. She worked with people who had injuries like Emma's." "I know it sounds crazy, but—" "Crazy," Sarah interrupted. Her eyes were shining with tears. "Grace, you gave us our daughter back. I don't care if you used voodoo or magic or—" "It's not voodoo," Grace said quietly. "It's traditional medicine. Knowledge passed down through generations. My grandmother understood things about the body and the mind that modern doctors don't always consider." Robert leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell us what you were doing? Would you have let me?" Grace met his eyes. 3 months ago, would you have trusted a maid's grandmother's remedies over expensive doctors and fancy medical equipment? The silence in the room answered her question. Emma spoke up from the couch. "Grace saved me. Not just my legs, me. She gave me hope when I'd given up. If she'd told you what she was doing, you would have fired her." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh God, you're right. We would have." The next day, the story leaked. Nobody knew how, but by morning, news vans were parked outside the Montgomery mansion gates. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The headline on every news site read, "Billionaire's paralyzed daughter walks again. Miracle or medical mystery?" Grace watched from her bedroom window, her stomach churning. Her phone rang. It was her sister calling from Jamaica. "Grace, you're on TV. They're saying you healed that white girl with Mama Rose's medicine." "I know," Grace whispered. "The whole island is talking about it. Mama Rose would be so proud." "Or so angry," Grace interrupted. "She always said this knowledge was sacred. Not for show. not for fame. Actually, let me pause here because this detail is important. Mama Rose had warned Grace about this. If you share our ways with outsiders, she'd said, they'll either worship you or destroy you, and both are dangerous. 3 days later, the medical board called an investigation. They wanted to know exactly what Grace had done. They wanted her grandmother's notebook. They wanted to test her methods, approve them, control them. Grace sat in the Montgomery study, surrounded by lawyers Robert had hired to protect her. They're saying you practiced medicine without a license, one lawyer explained. That's a serious charge. I didn't practice medicine, Grace said firmly. I did massage and made herbal tea. That's not illegal. It is if you claim it can heal paralysis, another lawyer countered. Emma burst into the room, her mother right behind her. This is ridiculous. Grace helped me. Why is she being punished? Because the world is complicated, sweetie, Robert said gently. But that's when they discovered something that made their blood run cold. A pharmaceutical company had been watching the story. They wanted to buy Grace's grandmother's remedies, turn them into pills, patent them, make millions. Absolutely not, Grace said when they called. This isn't about money. Then what is it about? The CEO asked. It's about healing. It's about hope. It's about remembering that people are more than just bodies. They're spirits too. The CEO laughed. That's very poetic, Ms. Williams, but impractical. We could help thousands of paralyzed patients with your methods. By turning my grandmother's sacred knowledge into expensive pills only rich people can afford? Grace shook her head. No, thank you. 1 week later, the Montgomerys held a press conference. Grace stood beside Emma, holding her hand. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Robert raised his hand for silence. 3 months ago, my daughter couldn't walk, he began. Today she can. That's not a miracle. That's the result of hard work, determination, and the knowledge of a woman named Grace Williams. He turned to Grace. Grace used techniques passed down through her family, techniques that modern medicine often ignores. She didn't claim to have magic powers. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She simply offered hope and ancient wisdom to a girl who desperately needed both. Sarah stepped forward. The medical establishment wants to investigate Grace. They want to control what she did. But here's what we want to say. Traditional healing methods deserve respect. They deserve research. They deserve to be preserved and honored, not stolen and patented. Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. Grace gave me my life back, and she didn't do it for money or fame. She did it because she cared, because she believed in me when nobody else did. What would you have done in this situation? The room erupted with questions. But Grace just smiled, thinking of Mama Rose. Her grandmother had been right. The knowledge was sacred, but it was also meant to be shared carefully, respectfully, with love. 6 months later, Emma ran across the soccer field, her legs strong and sure. In the stands, Sarah and Robert cheered. Beside them sat Grace, watching with proud tears in her eyes. Emma had returned to school. She'd rejoined the soccer team. She was singing again. But more than that, she'd learned something important. Healing wasn't just about medicine or money or fancy hospitals. Sometimes it was about hope, about belief, about ancient wisdom passed down through generations. Grace still worked for the Montgomerys, but now she also taught others. Not for profit, she refused all the money offers. Instead, she started a foundation with Sarah, teaching traditional healing methods to physical therapists and nurses. Mama Rose's notebook was scanned and shared freely online, translated into 20 languages. The medical board dropped their investigation after thousands of people signed petitions supporting Grace. Doctors started studying her methods, surprised to find that science backed up much of what Mama Rose had known all along. And Emma? She never forgot the woman who taught her that sometimes the most powerful healing comes not from what money can buy, but from what the heart freely gives. Grace stood up to leave the soccer game, but Emma ran over, sweaty and grinning. "Thank you," Emma said, hugging her tight, "for everything." Grace smiled, thinking of Mama Rose smiling down from heaven. "Your body remembered how to heal, baby." I just reminded it to listen. And in that moment, standing in the sunshine with a girl who shouldn't have been able to stand at all, Grace knew that some knowledge truly was sacred and worth fighting to preserve. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more emotional and powerful billionaire stories coming soon.